Hi guys, welcome back to our Porsche restoration project. In this video we're going to go over the first assembly process procedures of our shell before we take it off the rotisserie. So what we're going to mainly concentrate on today is just routing all our cables and lines through our tunnel. And take them through the back end here, route them through our tunnel inside here. We'll be able to take advantage of our rotisserie. It'll make it a little bit easier for us to do that. Bring them through the front and then land them where they need to go up front here: speedometer cable, battery cable, and wiring harness. So let's go into the shop, take a look at what we're going to pull through here today, and then we'll get started. Okay, so here's a look at our cables and lines we're going to be pulling through the tunnel today. I think first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with our wiring harness. I've already been through this guy from front to back, cleaning it all up, checking all the connections, putting new end connections on there, and then labeling everything real good. This was cleaned up and detailed right after I pulled it out of the car. It was better to do it then because everything was fresh in memory. Once I cleaned it up, I relabeled everything so that it would make sense after we get a little bit farther down the road. It's been a couple of years since I pulled this guy out of there. So as we put it through the car and start landing things, we'll be able to explain that a little bit better. And then also we've got our fuel lines we'll pull through there. Master brake line through there, speedometer cable, we got the battery cable going. So yeah, quite a few parts to go through that tunnel. So let's get started with the wiring harness first and see how that goes. Yeah, so another windy day in Las Vegas, guys. Just try and bear with me for a minute here while we get through this. So first thing we want to do is we want to pick a warm day to stretch out the harness from front to back. So from front section to rear, we're running about 25 feet long. Temperature out here is about 80 degrees. And what this is going to do, this is going to help make it supple, so we're not putting any stresses or any thing that could possibly harm the harness as we're rerouting it back through the car. If we do this on a cold day, we could, without knowingly, if we put a bend in it or pull on it too hard, we might actually damage some of the wiring internally. So this will just help get us out of that problem. So everything's cleaned up, ready to go. Let's get out of the wind here and start threading this guy through. So booth temperature is about 80, which is perfect for doing this. It's to keep everything nice and supple and won't damage our harness in any way. So what I'm doing is I'm starting from the front, just laying it on a blanket. In this area here, this is the rear section, so all this has to be pulled through the tunnel. So what I've done is taken some shrink wrap, tightened everything up to start our run. Here's our run here. So we're going to go down this first grommet. Here's our rear section. So we're going to take that, thread it through the grommet, and keep going until it stops. Okay, so that's as far as it's going to go. So once we get to here, then we're going to have to disconnect our relays, make sure everything's labeled real good, so when you get through the floorboard you can put it back together. Also, this grommet's going to have to come out. There's a couple of tight spots in there as you're threading it through. Let's look at the inside here. Okay, so here we are inside. All that's got to go to the rear. So what we're doing is we're going to feed that through the inside here. See there, it's coming through. And then what that's going to do, there's a, can't get the camera in there, right here. There's a like a conduit in there. So that wire is going to run through that shielded conduit. All right, let's push that through, see what it looks like. And then everything going to the engine compartment and rear lights is now at the rear. Piece of cake. And then at the engine compartment, we want to install some protective shielding. I'm using a 3/4 inch sleeve. This is made by DEI. This is going to replace the original. This is kind of like a plastic vinyl type tubing. You can see it's really starting to show its age, but it's done its job. It's protected the wires from all the heat. So as this wiring harness gets older, we want to give it a little bit better protections. I think this stuff's going to really do the job. Okay, let's finish threading that through there. We'll peel this upper section off here right as we get close, and then put it on into the firewall. Next, we're going to run the battery cable through there. Same thing on this guy. Warm it up in the sun, probably a good hour. Make it nice and supple. And that's going to go in this left port here and share the same conduit sleeve as our electrical harness. So that's coming out of there. You got an over-under type situation. We're going to route it all the way up, keeping it sleeved all the way through. And then there's a slit in this area here. I'm going to bring that guy through right there. And then we got a rubber seal. Same thing, warm that up in the sun. And then that seal is going to press down in there. Next is going to be the speedometer cable. So I'm going to tie this up with a little masking tape so the nut doesn't fall behind. And then also get our boot on here before we start threading her in. Once you start getting it in there, there's a couple of hold down tabs inside. You'll see exactly where it goes. Next, let's do the clutch cable. Let's just take a quick look and compare the original to our replacement cable and sleeve. So this clevis pin, this is off the original assembly from this guy here. Still in really good condition. And then you can see here the fitment and length of our replacement parts are virtually identical to the originals. Also come around to the end here, and our adjustment end here going to fit real nice. So let's get that set up and we'll get that guy threaded in there. Okay, so here's our clutch cable conduit. What's got to happen here? A couple things. So first thing we want to do, we want to make sure it's cleaned out inside. What I did was take a long wire and some paper towel and just push it all the way through to the other end until it falls out. Do that several times until you're nice and clean, and then you're ready for fresh cable and grease. So I'll grease this up as I'm feeding it in. Once we're where we need to be, then we're going to put the sleeve on from this end. This flange here has to bottom out against the edge of this conduit. I'm also going to put a coating of seam sealer on here, so when this slides over the conduit and bottoms out, that's going to be its permanent location. The seam sealer will take over, act like a cement, so we don't have it moving around. It takes some of the vibration out of it and shouldn't negatively affect your pedal action. So let me go ahead and do those things, get the grease going, and we'll start sliding her in. All right, using some synthetic grease. Get on there nice and thick. And try not to get it on the outside of the conduit. Okay, and then the last 24 inches right in here, we want our grease to be a little bit thinner because we're going to slide our sleeve over it, and we don't want to be screeding off any. This is a little bit too much. Let's clean that off and then slide our sleeve over. You see here where it's going to screed. Plastic inside. That's it. She's bottomed. And then once we're where we need to be, then we'll just take and work the grease a little bit back and forth, turn the cable, and that'll just help kind of smear it around. Alright, I think we're good. We'll just rest that right there for now and move on to the accelerator cable. So looking at the rear section of our accelerator cable, this section here is going to snap onto the bell crank at the transmission, and then you have a flexible rubber coupling, and basically what this guy does, this takes out the shock and vibration from the engine as it transfers up the line to your accelerator pedal. This is the original one out of the car. Just kind of reconditioned that as best I can. Hopefully we can make that work. If not, they do make an aftermarket one of these. Has a complete metal enclosure. Construction is a little bit different, but I'm just going to go with this to try and retain the original feel on the foot pedal. And let's take a look up front, see what that looks like. Front section, real simple. Just going to grease that up, and we're going to snap that on the accelerator linkage, and that should be it. A little prep work we need to do inside the tunnel. Let's go take a look at that, and then we'll run this guy through. And then one little tip you can do here is that as the rod is coming through the inside of the tunnel, sits down in this little pocket here. I put some felt in there, it's a little sticky back felt, and what that'll do, that'll just act like a buffer and take any shock or vibration out of the line so you don't have any rattling going on inside the car. All right, that one went pretty smooth. So let's just take a look inside there, our pocket. You can see as I'm moving that around, that felt's going to work out real good for us. Okay, so that one's finished. Let's move on to our main brake line. Here's the front of our main brake line, so I'm just going to leave that straight until we get through the tunnel. We can bend that when we get to the other end. And then also the rear section here, got a little bit of a tight, almost a 90-degree bend. I'm going to bend that after we integrate it with the rest of the system. A couple of grommets, a couple of locking rings, and then some rubber for our hold down tabs. So this one should go pretty smooth. All right, let's run that through, see what it looks like. Yeah, main brake line, no problem. That's about where it's going to go. So decided to go ahead and put that 90-degree bend in now while we got the room. So it's going to have a junction block right there for our left and right brake lines. So next, let's get our flapper boxes installed for our heater control cables. Put these guys on next, and then we'll bring our heater control cables through the tunnel. These are the original flapper boxes that came off the car. Even though when I pulled them off, they look pretty grungy, but they're actually in very good shape. Internally amazing after 50 years. Even the seal, 100% perfect condition in there. Spring action is real good, so shouldn't have any problem with these guys. Basically just sandblasting, fresh paint, and then replating the hardware. Alright, let's bolt those guys on the car, see what they look like. Okay, got the right side all mounted up, ready to go here. Let's just take a look at a couple things that are important to the alignment of this clamp. So this tube here, this is where our cable is going to come through. This was power flushed with some WD-40 and one of those long needles that comes with. What I do is I just power flush that out, clean the tube, and it gets that back in a nice condition. That's just going to rest on there. Then our line is going to come through here. It's going to come out the end of this clamp, and that's going to go right through. You see that little hole in there? It's going to thread right through that bolt and then sandwich between the two washers. So that's how that's going to work. But this guy just rests on there. I'm not going to put any grease inside the line. However, I'm going to put a little grease inside this cylinder using a high temperature general purpose grease. So moving on to the left side then, so what we want to do is put this gasket on. You may have to do some trimming around this inside edge here. And the reason that is because the gasket comes with a round hole in the center, and our tube that comes through the frame is actually at an angle. So actual shape on that hole is probably more elliptical. Just mark it off with a Sharpie, trim it out of there, and you're good to go. Okay, here we go. Just snug them down, and we should be good. That's going to line up right there. Tighten that guy down. All right, let's just have a quick look at our lever and see how that works. So what we got, we have a friction bushing between the inner and outer side of the lever. And what that's doing is it's allowing the nut and bolt to pinch this tight. So you're going to have to adjust that nut and bolt to have just the right amount of tension in there for positive stop forward, positive stop to the rear, and then it'll work. If we're too tight here, it's not going to work. If we're too loose, it's not going to hold. So it's got to be just the right amount. All right, let's take a look at our cables here before we grease those up. So what I've done is I've marked this section off here with tape. That section there is not going to get any grease. We're going to feed those in those tubes first. Here's our tubes. They're going to go down left and right side. Get those fed in there, and then I'm going to pull the tape and then grease from there all the way up to our lever. Do that just like we did our clutch cable, and then run them through. Okay, that's going to take care of our flapper boxes. So next we're going to do the fuel line, but first let's just for fun stick a couple of old pictures in there, what this guy looked like before we pulled it off the car. So looking at our fuel system now, so what we got, we have the original lines I pulled off the car. These guys have been scrubbed through from the inside and then also polished up on the outside. They're in really good condition, so that's why I wanted to retain them. Got the factory bends in there, and condition is really good. So what I did on the inside, I just used like a tube cleaning tool and then extended it on some wire and ran it down on the inside with some carburetor cleaner and really scrubbed them out. Also, we're going to need some special grommets to secure it to the frame. We're going to need the correct size fuel hose, clamps. I'm not going to use ferrules for this because we're sliding onto a smooth end type fitting here. So if this was a barb fitting, we can use a ferrule. But for modern fuels, it's really safer to use a hose clamp on a smooth surface. Okay, and then I've got two different kinds of hoses here. I've got one by Choline, I've got one by Gates. And the reason I'm using two different ones, this particular one made by Gates has a higher normal operating temperature range than the one by Choline. So I'm going to use this one specifically down by the exhaust area, and then this can go everywhere else. Okay, I got the rear section put in. Let's just take a close look at the location and what we're doing here. So I'm using a little rubber hose in between our hold down clamps. There's a couple under the seat here, and then there's one up on the frame. And then also as we go through the frame, this is the location of our special grommets. Got one there, and then we got one at the top here, and a little red rubber grease right in here. Both surfaces will help glide that guy through there. Okay, let's roll the car over on its side as we have to bring the other line in through the front section. So setting up this long line to go through the tunnel, in the middle section here I'm putting some rubber bumpers on, and the reason I'm putting those on there is because the section of tunnel it's going through has actually got the same type of sleeve as our wiring harness, and this will protect from any kind of interior vibration. So what's going to happen then, right when I get up to the hole there, I'm going to peel this guy off, go around on the inside, place it on the inside of the tunnel, and then move on down to the next section, peel it off, put it on the inside, and so on. Yeah, definitely wrestling match putting that one in there. About an hour and a half to set that line up complete. Going through the firewall here, we're not going to be able to use a special grommet in there because there's like a clash of angles between the fuel line and the body lines there, so the only way to seal that off really is with some seam sealer. And then our clamp hold down area, what I like to try to do is set up the angle of the clamp so that if I have to get in here later, say a couple years down the road, I need to change that fuel line out, get into the clamp and the angle of the screw, it's going to work for me. Okay, so let's go to the back, take a look and see what that looks like. So the back side here is no problem. The only thing here to look out for really is just setting up the angle of your screws here so that if you're crawling around underneath the car, say in a couple years, you change that line out, you can get between everything, not going to have transmission in the way or other parts in the way to get to those screws. Okay, so next let's go ahead and do our brake lines. These are probably going to be the simplest thing to put on here. What I'm going to do is just put the seam sealer around these housings. You got one there, one there. Here's our brake lines. So pretty simple, front and back. Here's a rear section. So this is a section right here. This is going to slide over those housings. And I'm just going to put a light coat of grease on there and just slide them on. So let's do that, see what they look like. Yeah, so no problem on those emergency brake cables. Took about 2 minutes to put those guys on there. So that's real simple. Okay, so let's call it good here, guys, for routing lines through the tunnel. I'm not going to route any more things through there, shifter and shifter rod, until we get it back on the ground. So let's just give it a quick once over and see how we did, where everything lands and what it looks like. So looking at the engine compartment then, we got the wire and harness going through the body to the tail lights. It's basically setting in place. We'll have to integrate our control board to all that later. Fuel line coming through the frame here, capped off temporarily just so we don't have dirt, dust, and animals getting down in there. Coming through our frame. Here's some basic wires just resting where they need to go. Okay, coming from the passenger rear, up the tunnel. See our emergency brake cables, heater control shifter, our lines going down the tubes there. See our fuel line running through there. Also you see our wiring harness coming through the tunnel there. Other cables where they need to be for our foot pedals. And then our relays all mounted up. Coming up from the driver's side, you can see the fuel line and grommet, also accelerator cable, and our handbrake cables again. And then we get near the front here, you can see the fuel line and also the cables to our foot pedals. And last but not least, the front of the car. And that's going to be it for this video. Well, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.